That's it.
You're good.
Ready? So I'd like to call to order tonight's study session of August 28th, 2023 at 6:03 PM. And for roll call, all council members are here except for Councilmember Cole, and she will be, she called and said she would probably be a few minutes late. So we'll move right on to number one in our study session business, Parks Planning Update, Library Capital Facility Area Update. I'll call on City Administrator Jason Wilson and Pierce County Library District Executive Director Gretchen Casserati. That's a title.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I turn it over to Ms. Casserati, she's here tonight to provide you an update on the library capital facility area that was passed by the voters a couple of weeks ago. And I'll turn it over to Gretchen.
Hi, sorry, I'm juggling screens here. Can you hear me okay?
Good.
Thank you. Good to see you all. Thank you very much for allowing me some time on your agenda this evening to provide you with an update. And I'm going to try to share my screen. And I do not have permission for participant screen sharing.
Get that.
And okay. We did send some slides ahead in your packet. So while we're sorting that out, my intention tonight was to just formally go over the election results, talk about the next steps for the LCFA formation and the building project, and then answer any questions that you might have. I'll try one more time. There we go. Let's see if appreciate your patience. Now it is still showing notes. There we go. Okay, I can see in the view in the chambers that it's up on that screen. So I'm going to roll forward. So mentioned that I wanted to cover those things tonight. So the election was certified on August 15th, and it was requiring 1,585 votes to validate the election. The total votes cast was over 2,000. And then the final tally for Proposition 1 to form the LCFA and the bond was 68.57% in favor of the measure. So we are grateful to this excellent partnership we've had with the city through this planning process from our study session in January to the August 1st primary. And we're ready to get started in digging into the work. And we are grateful to everyone who cast their votes and looking forward to getting started on the project. We heard really good feedback from a lot of folks throughout the process about how happy they were with the new location. It was certainly a recurring theme that I personally heard in the number of private meetings, in our open houses, and a lot through our outreach, where people were really happy to have the library more conveniently located. So again, thank you to the city for working with us for that site. The bond for the library will pay for the up to 20,000 square foot branch. That branch will be a place for all generations and all community members to come to a community place to learn, enjoy, and connect, our strategic priority areas. A modern library, as we've covered with you all as well, will encompass modern design, which includes a lot of natural light, sustainable environmental features, and concern for accessibility for people with all abilities in a community. What it looks like, we don't know yet, but we will proceed with hiring an architect in the coming weeks. So the next step for the formation of the LCFA is to coordinate with the county council. They will appoint 3 members from the county council to the LCFA board and set the bylaws for that governing body. I've started that process and we'll keep Jason in the loop as well as we work through that. They intend to, or right now the plan is to have that formalized by the end of this calendar year. And myself and Cliff Joe, our business director at the library, will support them through that process, as well as start to develop the formal agreements. So that next stage is establishing what the terms of all those agreements will be between which parties. So I'll be interested to hear from you all and from the city of Sumner more broadly, what we need to start to discuss to lock into any agreements that you wish to have, or what kind of a role you all would like to play through the building design process. So right now we're just in this communication stage, and that will be some follow-ups for us to discuss. And then we're also in the process for the rest of this year, finalizing all of those budget and revenue commitments so that we can finalize our project budget. And we've started the process to hire an architect and establish that scope of work. We anticipate we should have an architect selected by the end of the year and be able to move forward into the design process in 2024. We have a little bit of a head start because we do have a building program template that we developed with architects in the past. But we do want to make sure that we have public engagement through the building design process. So right now we're estimating that will be about 9 months. And we would kick that off right away in 2024. And then beyond that, once the building is designed, the architects would formalize those construction drawings. We would secure contractors and then move into the construction phase of the project. I really can't speak to exactly how long that will take. I've mentioned to you in prior meetings that it certainly could take 18 to 24 months for a construction project, but we really won't know that until we know what the scope of the building is, the designs, and then secure our contractors to give us a realistic timeline. But right now, that's a realistic estimate for how long we think it could take. In 2024, the LCFA will need to take actions to actually support and work with us to do the bond sales, and then filing the excess tax levy certification, which won't happen until November of 24. One question we've received is about when will people start paying that tax, and that would be in 2025 when those collections would start to come in. We did learn that through our process of understanding the timelines and the requirements through all the different parties at the county, which is the assessors, the treasurer's offices, the elections, and the county council, of course. So then we'd be looking at the construction phase. Once the building is constructed and reaches substantial completion, the library would be able to move into the building, and we would take some time to make sure all the books are in the right place on the shelves and all the materials and fixtures and furnishing are plugged in and ready to go for moving, for opening the doors to the public. And then we would obviously be moving out of the building that we're currently in. So we do intend to, once we start to move through this process, come to the council to request an extension on our current agreement with the city so that we can try to align when we could move out of that building with closer to when we anticipate a new facility would open at the new location. So everyone wants to know how soon and when will it open? And the realistic answer is we don't know yet, but we can at least get some ballparks so that we can start to move forward in really digging into the work. So I tried to be as brief and concise as possible to allow for any questions and discussion. I look forward to hearing from you all, and we are just thrilled and excited to move into this next phase of the project.
Thank
Anyone
you.
have any questions?
Questions? Councilmember Tero.
Yeah, I noticed you have still green. Okay. I noticed you that the library was able to get money from the state, and are there any restrictions or requirements that entails?
Yes, I am just still learning what those are. Some of them are formalities like communicating with the tribes to consider any potential artifacts that may be found on site. So some of them are procedural and communication. Some of them are also going to be around the expending of the funds and reimbursement. So the requests that I submitted were for pre-design. So those would need to be taken care of during the 24 and 25 biennial budgets. So right now our timelines are looking pretty good that we should be able to meet all of those requirements to collect the full funding that they've committed for the project. Keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah, all right. You know, I'm always excited about the library and just so pleased that the voters were so supportive, and it's good to hear that it won't be until 2025 that they will start seeing the levy.
And if I may, and
Thank
Councilmember Potato, if I may add, the library intends to front the expenses for the architect and the design and all of that. That's a part of what we submitted to that state funding. So even though there would be a lag between the levy collection, the library is going to make sure that we're not waiting until then to get the work going. I just want to be clear that the library is committed to putting the cash out for those expenses.
Okay, good, glad, thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody online? No, they're pretty quiet.
Thank you, Mayor. And tonight we also have with us the chair of the citizen committee that helped get the ballot measure passed. And I know Mr. Bill Pugh would like to come up and say a few words about this topic.
Mr. Pugh.
Thanks for operating the system, Jason. I was just going to have one thanks, but since we have Executive Director Casserati in the line, I'd like to offer two thanks from the Citizens Committee. And the first one was the decision to put the ballot measure on the primary. When that decision was made, I was, well, never mind what I was thinking, but it was like, I mean, yes, I will. I said, what were you thinking? And as it turned out, it was a great decision. So my appreciation to the executive director and the trustees for doing that. Because there was a series of really good decisions and things that happened that ended up with the result that we did. But the second is to thank the city council. I know it was a tough deliberation on setting the boundaries for the district, and I got all the arguments and felt each one of them, but ultimately making the decision that you did and looking at the data that we've looked at during the campaign, I think it would really have marginalized the success of the outcome on the thing. So between those two decisions and a lot of work by a lot of people, and ultimately, like you said, the citizens of Sumner said yes and end up with 68.5%. It's absolutely incredible and a heck of a mandate. So again, just thank you. That was, you don't hear thank you enough. And this is one of those times when you should.
Thank you. And thanks for all your hard work too. I know you put in endless hours and time, so thank you very much.
Got to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Councilmember Newman.
I just wanted to return the thanks because so there are the decisions made, but so often, especially when it just comes to council, and I mean like councils on many levels, once the decisions happen, if there's no follow through, it really doesn't matter what our decisions are. And so, I mean, I saw the neighborhoods that went to work in advocating for the library and, talking to their neighbors, but a lot of concentrated efforts that went into it. And so I want to thank everyone who was able to participate in that after decisions were made.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Moving on to 2023 housing legislation update. Say that fast 3 times.
Thank you, Mayor. Community and Economic Development Director Ryan Windage is here tonight to give you another update on the 2023 housing legislation. As you know, a number of bills passed the state legislature this year that take away a lot of our local ability for land use, particularly when it comes to affordable housing and increased density. So he's going to be going over a long list of bills that we have to implement over the next 6 to 18 months. And we don't have all the answers of how we're going to implement these, but we're definitely working on it. But we wanted to get before you so you have a clear understanding of the amount of work that his department as well as Mr. Beagle's department are going to be undertaking in the coming months here.
All right, thank you, Jason. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll just go ahead and get started here as with Jason's intro is absolutely right. We were tracking the activity of the legislature this last session. And not surprisingly, given the housing crisis in Washington state, growing homelessness numbers, it seems every year, affordable housing was front and center in their activity this year. So I'll be going through 9 different legislative outcomes. And as Jason was saying, talk about how we're going to be responding to these. And one of the things we are seeing is it just seems like the legislature is kind of taking matters in their own hands and telling jurisdictions things that they're going to have to do. So those are things that we're going to be responding to. It's much more of a top-down approach than I would say the Growth Management Act was originally envisioned as kind of a bottom-up approach. And we're seeing the legislature take these things into their own hands and mandating things that we are a little, honestly, as a planner for a long time, a little surprised, but that's what we're doing. So get into it. So one of their primary goals was to increase the opportunity for housing capacity. And I'll go into some of the tools that have been passed to try and make that happen. Really kind of the supply and demand approach, and increase the supply. Hopefully you're able to lower the cost per unit for housing. They also were focused on incentives for developing affordable housing, reducing barriers, whether that's timelines or permit processing, waiving connection fees, those kinds of things. And one of the things I'll also talk about is climate change and resiliency, which is a little bit outside of the housing scope, but it's something you should be aware of that we're working on as well. And then finally, one of the things we heard when we were tracking the session was kind of this idea that if the state made the changes, it would take the pressure off of local decision makers. In other words, you can kind of blame the states, like, oh, we have to allow X amount of types of housing, and the state's telling us to do that. They thought, honestly, they're doing us a favor to be able to blame the state. I'm not convinced that was actually a favor, but anyway, that was their approach. So the first one here is a little bit esoteric, but it's basically updating our building code to allow for temporary emergency shelters. And this has to happen first at the State Building Code Council level. And then after they take action, and they're required to take action a couple years out, and then we'll have to amend our city building code to address that. And that'll really be on Development Services Department, since building official is in their department. This is pretty kind of small potatoes, I think, but needs to happen. And we'll have to respond to it. Climate change and resiliency. The Growth Management Act has a requirement that we look at measures the city can take to help reduce impacts on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And really how this will kind of transpire is be implemented is like our transportation plan will look at, optimizing options for bikes, pedestrians, transit, accommodating electric vehicles. And then our parks plan already, is a green space, open space type plan, but we'll also be, looking at how much forest canopy we have, and even policies around mitigating for wildland fires and increasing tree canopy. And those are not necessarily mutually exclusive, I guess. So this is going to be woven into our 2024 comp plan update. Our consultants are well aware and well versed in the climate change policy. And so you'll see that come through as a package as part of our 2024 comp plan update. And any regulations that come out of that as far as implementation will also be part of the 2024 plan. Waiving connection fees. So one of the bills that came through creates an option for waiving fees according to a program that's been established by ordinance. And this is typically focused around emergency shelters, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, and affordable housing. So right now, we don't have a program for waiving connection charges for properties that are owned or developed by nonprofits or housing authorities that would meet the current legislation. So that's a big policy discussion in the future as we move forward on that. Our current consultants who are working on our 2024 comprehensive plan update are also taking a look at this as an incentive for developing affordable housing. So once again, it'll be part of the 2024 comp plan update in terms of policy discussion. And the legislature also has heard from developers that design review for projects can slow them down, can make for kind of this loop that goes around and around where design commissions continue to see the same project over and over because it hasn't quite met their standards for design. So they've asked for design guidelines to have clear and objective standards for design review to run concurrent with the permit review and be logically integrated and consolidated with our overall permit review process. So the good news here is we updated our design guidelines in 2017, and that was our objective, was to make things clear and objective. And so we've done a lot of the work here. One of the things that we will need to look at is the new legislation restricts design review to only one public meeting. And it also requires a lot of more administrative review. So if you have a project, it may just be administrative, meaning our staff would look at it and it would not go in front of the design commission. So that's another change that we'll have to adjust to. And I don't think it's too far off of what we do today, but it will be a bit of an adjustment. And that is going to be looked at by staff. So our staff obviously is very familiar with our design guidelines and our design review process, as well as the form-based code that we use in the town center plan area. So staff will be working on this and the due date is December 31st, 2024 is when we're planning on having that completed. And second here, I think I'm out of order. Can I go back?
Carmen, if you click on the main screen, then Ryan can control it. Yeah, just click right there.
Sorry, Ryan.
That's okay. You're just making this a little more challenging. All right. The changes that were made by the state to allow for more accessory dwelling units, I think, is one of the bigger changes that came out of the legislation. And you'll recall that it was earlier this year, the council adopted some, I thought, progressive changes to the accessory dwelling units code, made a lot of adjustments to that. And this legislation is asking for even more adjustments, not the least of which it's to allow at least 2 accessory dwelling units per single family lot in a low density residential zone. So it's not just one. Right now our code allows for 1. This will allow for 2. And not only in it, and they could be 2 detached accessory dwelling units. It could be 2 within the house. It could be 1 in the house attached to the house and 1 detached. So there's a combination there. Increases heights from 18 to 24 feet. Removes window and door location restrictions. Allows for no parking within a ½ mile of the Sumner station. If you're doing an ADU, you don't have to do street improvements. Impact fees are to be reduced by 50% of the normal impact fee amount. Removes requirements that there be an owner that lives on site 6 months out of the year, which is in our code currently. So this makes a lot of changes to the accessory dwelling unit regulations that is intended, obviously, to incentivize and make and lower the bar in terms of ability for ADUs to be built in a community. And our community, it's 2 ADUs per single family lot. And so that's going to be some changes, obviously, that we're going to need to look at as we're going through the zoning code. Our consultants who are doing, again, the 2024 comp plan update have already begun looking at amendments. So once again, that'll be part of the discussion as we go through the 2024 comp plan update process.
Brian, can we stop for a question?
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead.
So when it says at least 2, it sounds like you have to have 2, not 1 or 2, so.
You have to allow for at least 2.
Oh, you have to
You could do
allow,
one if
so
you
you
wanted
could
to.
have 1.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about this code is they've defined principal unit to include duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes and single-family homes. So, we need to continue to ask some questions about this, but what that tells me is even like in our medium density residential zone, we have quite a few duplexes and smaller triplexes and things, that if you had room on the lot, you could actually come in and apply for an accessory dwelling unit to say your duplex. And so you get 3 units. Anyhow, I think that was every bit of the intent of the legislature. When I first read through the legislation, I was just thinking accessory to single family houses because that's what we've always done. But Ann Siegenthaler did a little more complete read of the code and she said, Brian, I think this says that if you had a duplex, you could do an accessory unit. I'm like, really? Because that just, again, it's looking for opportunities to add units to the community is what it's doing. And
So we
we'll
have
to adjust
Councilmember
that.
Stewart. Go ahead, Earl.
Thank you. Ryan, I just have a question about the bullet where it says no parking within a half mile of the Sumner Station. I'm not sure I understand what that means. Is this for people who live within a half mile of the Sumner Station, or can you explain that a little better?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to develop an accessory dwelling unit within a half a mile of the Sumner Station, you would not have to provide off-street parking on the lot. So you could rely on on-street parking for that unit's parking requirements.
Okay, does that impact, do you foresee that that would impact parking at the Sumner Station and say the new parking garage?
No, it would create more on-street vehicles on the street parking, residential vehicles on the street parking is what would happen. So if somebody came in, they said, well, I have a small lot, I can fit an ADU on there, but I don't have room for parking on my lot. They would be allowed to park in the street.
Oh, on the street, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Carmen, can I get the power to move
Sorry,
here?
there you go.
Thanks. The other thing that the legislature was looking at was making sure that the permit review process didn't inadvertently slow down and create costs for affordable housing and projects really in general. So they went back in and took a look at the permit review requirements in GMA and added some specifics around review time periods for permit applications. For example, if it's a review for a land use permit and has no public notice, then it should be completed within 65 calendar days. If there's public notice, then it's 100 calendar days. If there's a public hearing involved, it should be approved within 107 calendar days. And in checking with our Development Services Department, these are reasonable timeframes. But interestingly enough, the code also sets up fees such that you come in and the city would collect 80% of the fee up front. And then if you missed the time period by more than 20% of the original time period, you get a 10% refund or you get a 10% break on your fee, your total fee. And then if if it's delayed by more than 20% of the original time period, then you get a 20% refund. So basically, if the permit's not done and issued on time, you're going to see a savings on your fees. So that's one of the new requirements, as well as they've also made it very clear that you have to provide a written determination of completeness that begins the permit timelines process. So
I have a question from
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor.
absolutely.
So, Mr. Windisch, the way I understand permits, a lot of the times I don't know how you're gonna track that, because I think a lot of the times that our staff has to hand it back to the client, and they have to come up with a certain amount of information and get it back. So I can see where I think sometimes there's delays on that side. And so I don't know how you're gonna track that exactly. I don't think you can always blame it on staff, is what I'm getting at, that I know we've smoothed out our process a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Development Services does a great job, and they communicate with the applicant. And the legislation actually does take that into consideration, that if the delay is on the applicant's side, it's not counted against their time frame. So.
Okay, thank you.
That's your
That's
point.
a relief.
So again, so our Development Services Department has a consultant that's been working for them on permit review, but they also have the capability and the familiarity with our permit review process, that they will be contracting with us to look at updating the permit review process for Sumner. That'll begin by October 1st this year. And then another creative approach to adding housing units in town and in cities was to allow for existing buildings that are zoned for commercial or mixed use, or residential for that matter, to if they're like zoned for multifamily, to increase the number of units within an existing structure. So if somebody had a commercial building, say in downtown, and they came in and they said, well, you're allowed 20 units to the acre, let's say, they could do 30 units to the acre if they could make all the units, fit within the existing building. So it's really looking at existing structures and how can you maximize potential housing in those structures. And some of the challenges with that are, typically you're looking at non-conforming situations and trying to adjust how much you're going to allow in any given building. In our town center area in particular, we have some restrictions that really push for redevelopment instead of taking an existing building and putting more units in it. Because you put more units in it, you're going to add value to the building. And if the town center plan is kind of looking at more of a redevelopment opportunity, it could change how fast things change in our town center area. Keeping your existing structures though and building inside them would have less of a visual impact on the community. And that's kind of the flip side to that. But basically, the legislation allows for increasing and incentivizing putting units into existing buildings. So again, this is going to be taken on by a development services consultant to take a look at our code and see how we allow for this to happen. One of the bills that received the most attention going through the legislative process was what they call the middle housing bill. And middle housing is really smaller multiplexes, so duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, some townhome style development. And the reason this is so important is because that's typically the more affordable types of housing in a community. And some of this goes back to, I'm gonna use Seattle as an example, where Seattle has a fair amount of zoning that is single-family residential. And so then they would zone like around transit stations, higher density. And so they would end up with these high rises, and then they would end up with single-family houses. But they didn't end up with a lot of in the middle housing. And Sumner, as a matter of course, has actually quite a bit of middle housing. You drive up through, well, through the area, the buildings, neighborhoods right around here, or you're north of Main Street in our medium density residential zoning, you'll find a lot of triplexes, duplexes, smaller garden style apartments. So we have quite a bit of that already, but this code requires us to go further. No surprise. So it requires for at least 2 units to be allowed per lot in our low density residential zones. So low density residential zones are predominantly in Sumner, single family residential. And so this would allow for at least a duplex on any single lot in our low density residential zone. Clearly, it would increase our housing capacity and supply. There are some limits on how much the parking requirements can be based on the size of the lot. And again, it's probably less impact on the visual character of a community than high-rise apartments, for example, but still be a change in the fabric of some of the single family, the more predominantly single family zones. Our consultants are also looking at this one as part of our 2024 comp plan update. Part of the reason we're looking at it so closely is because clearly it's going to add capacity, housing capacity to the area, which translates into, traffic and other impacts. So we need to look at this as a whole as we're doing our comprehensive plan update and our EIS work and our transportation plan update. So, so that's another big change, allowing for at least a duplex basically per lot in our low density residential zones. This one's kind of pretty quick and easy. This is they amended a affordable housing definition in the RCWs. And really it makes some, for rental housing, affordable means that no more than 30% of a household's monthly income is spent for rent and utilities other than a telephone, or for permanently affordable homeownership. No more than 38% of the household's monthly income is towards the mortgage principal or interest, property taxes, homeowners insurance, homeowner association fees, and land lease fees. And in addition, the total household debt is no more than 45% of the monthly household income. So this is the rule of thumb has been that a household should not be spending more than 30% of their monthly income on housing. And this gets a little more specific, especially around permanently affordable homeownership options. So we'll be looking at amending our definition for affordable housing to more closely match this one. And finally, this is the last one. The Blake fix. I thought the Blake fix was all about drugs and drug possession and all that. Turns out I was wrong. The Growth Management Act was amended during the Blake fix amendments. And the result was adding to the list of essential public facilities. And so GMA defines and lists out examples of essential public facilities that are things that are typically difficult to cite in a community. It might be a correction facility. It might be a drug rehab facility. It might be a train station, parking garage. Those are all considered essential public facilities. What was added to the list included opioid treatment programs, recovery residences, which are also known as clean and sober houses, where folks who are recovering from addiction live and receive support, and other harm reduction programs, such as safe injection sites. So being an essential public facility means that the city cannot prohibit them, but we can have a process for reviewing them, conditioning them, and deciding kind of what zones they're most appropriate in. So right now, our code doesn't address essential public facilities. So what we are proposing and moving forward on is kind of a short-term quick fix, which would be to amend our public facility definition to include essential public facilities. So if you open up our zoning code, and you go down the list of things allowed, you'd find public facility, and it's always requires a conditional use permit in every one of our zones. So there'd be some public process in terms of permitting. So make all public, so we would add essential public facility to our definition for public facility. And then it could be reviewed as a conditional use permit. That's the short-term fix. The long-term fix is, as I've said numerous times tonight, it's also going to be wrapped into our 2024 comp plan update and include more specifics in terms of process. But this is a good fix for the short term, and you'll probably see that in front of council for approval October or November. Happy to answer any questions on that one.
Do we have any questions? Anyone? No? Deputy Mayor.
Mr. Windisch, mine's back a ways, and that's where you have, you have staff maybe looking at things without the design commission, without it going to that. What do you think we'll be losing there? I mean, what did the design commission bring to the party on that?
So the design commission is staffed, or I guess staff's the right word, has members who are architects. They're in the design field, landscape architects. And so when it comes to sometimes specific recommendations, you have the applicant's architect communicating with another person in the design profession, and they kind of understand materials, they understand budgets, they understand kind of alternatives that might be more acceptable or possible. And so you lose a bit of that dialogue and potential. And if it's a highly controversial, well, not controversial, but if the applicant's really resistant to some of the design requirements, it often helps to have it explained by our design commission or our chair, or at least have the opportunity to kind of be heard if they have solutions different than what staff might be proposing. So in terms of that, it's great. At the end of the day, our staff are also talented and skilled and understand the guidelines. So I think it'll turn out fine at the end of the day. I just think there's a bit of a lost opportunity if you have some projects that are missing the mark a little bit. It's going to be a little more difficult for staff to get them up to par if you don't have them on the design committee,
Yeah,
if that
because
makes sense.
I've always looked at some of those as citizen representatives of us a lot of times, and they may know more about the flavor of our location and that sort of thing. So I hate to put it totally on staff, because they might just be looking at black and white rules and not have time to think about it. I just don't want everything to turn out vanilla is what I'm looking at. I liked it that we had some input, that we had suggestions from citizens, and I mean skilled citizens that could help make and give a little bit more, I don't know, pizzazz is the word for it, but just that we just don't want, staff doesn't have time to do a lot of, I just know they would come up with, here's sort of suggestions of other walkways or other things that I've seen somewhere, more time to do more input. So I'm hoping that we can still continue to try to get that use
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah, we have a very robust and prescriptive design guidelines. And so it makes it easier for staff to go down the list and say, yeah, it needs to have this, it needs to have that, it needs to have this. Now, the the, the different flavors and colors and variations might not be part of the discussion, but the big picture things will be in the code and it'll still look quality. That's what I want to emphasize.
And Mr. Windisch, this doesn't affect commercial retail type projects, that those still have design review.
Correct.
And residential still can have design review. Some of it will be administrative, but there's also on these bigger projects, there is one public meeting allowed.
Yeah.
So it's not completely in a vacuum.
All right, thank you.
Before we go to Councilmember Stewart, I let the record show that Pat Cole did join us, so. Councilmember Stewart.
There, okay, thank you. Ryan, we all know that the state is famous for imposing rules and regulations that in the industry we call unfunded mandates. Do you happen to have a feel for what this is going to do to your organization cost-wise, short-term and long-term? And I'm just curious about, I mean, it's awful early, but the impact will be felt eventually as in the form of a budget increase. So just kind of curious if you've looked that far down the road.
I haven't really looked that far down the road, to be honest with you. I think, some of the things on the top, waiving connection fees would have some kind of a budget implication. The permit review process. And this is really Doug Beagle's department, but I mean, if there's mandates for faster turnaround times, you need more staff or hiring more consultants to make that happen. So that could have budget implications. I'm going through the list here. So I mean, those are a couple of things that we need to be thinking about in terms of, and then climate change and resiliency. I think there's some things that are going to be baked into that. They're going to be expensive. I just don't know exactly how it's going to play out quite yet.
Sure. Well, then I don't expect you to know off the top of your head everything that's going to be impacted in the future. I just know that when we address budget issues where we are asking for more funding to be available and the costs are going up, the taxes are going up, we get complaints from the public who may or may not understand why that we be prepared to point the finger to the people in Olympia and all the unfunded mandates that are being placed on our operation. And that's just my editorial comment. Thank you for this presentation. It was really good.
Welcome.
Anybody else? Jason?
Mayor, I just have a few last comments about this. Housing legislation obviously took up a lot of time this year at the state legislature. Talking to my colleagues at AWC, as well as a number of other cities, we don't see that slowing down. There's probably going to be another round of bills that are introduced. Even though it's a short session, they'll be either reintroduced or new ones introduced that are going to further focus on affordable housing as well as housing supply. We are monitoring it. We are actively working to provide comment when appropriate. There was a number of times during the last legislative session that we worked directly with our lobbyists as well as AWC to provide input on bills, some of which have passed, some of which did not pass, and something that we're going to continue to watch. I will say, Ryan mentioned a lot of these bills are going to be things that we work on next year or that are part of the comprehensive plan update. One thing that the state legislature did do is a lot of these, rather than going into effect in a relatively short 90-day period, like a lot of legislation, they knew that most of the central Puget Sound region was going through their comprehensive plan updates, and they put the So they went into effect actually 6 months after we adopted. That gives us cities more time. Now, Mr. Windish saw the writing on the wall and said, oh my gosh, there's a lot of work here that needs to be done. And he worked with his staff to adjust some of our scope in our consultants to address these now, rather than adopting our comp plan and then immediately turn around and needing to hire consultants to address some of these issues. So a lot of work ahead, and I think the ball is going to be moving a little bit even while we're working on it, depending on what happens in Olympia this winter.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I understand that we can change all these rules and all and get ourselves in line, but what I was wondering is how long is it before developers and builders and that sort of thing get the information that these kind of things are available to them and that they change their mode of operation? I just wondered if you had a feel on that. I mean, how, is there a normal time period that these changes happen with them that can make these smaller units and things happen, or?
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is as the legislature is working on this, the Master Builders Association is right in there providing input. And part of the reason there's legislation that we're looking at is because that's the input they've been getting. Like, we would love to build more housing, but design review is slowing us down. The permit process is slowing us down. We don't have, opportunity to build smaller middle housing type units or examples. And so they've been listening to the builders. So they're communicating with their constituents and their developers. And so we're going to have to wait and see. I mean, like Jason said, the official deadline for much of this is June 30th, 2025. So we'll have to wait and see kind of as things are implemented, who takes advantage of it. But I think, especially like accessory dwelling units and required so many units, 2 units per lot, I have a feeling that builders and investors will be keeping an eye on that because it has, I think it has advantages for like a smaller investor. And not only that, I should mention with ADUs, and I know when we talked about earlier in the year, we have been getting a lot of questions from property owners for one reason or another, right? ADUs for aging parents, ADUs for returning college students, ADUs for, an income that helps offset their mortgage. So I think that's going to be a pretty popular option as it comes into focus for everybody who might want to develop.
Thanks, Ryan. I think that was a really good insight.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody online?
In closing, Mr. Windish will be back at the end of September to give an update on affordable housing because one of the bills that you discussed today sets target limits of how many housing units. So as you remember, as part of the comprehensive plan and also Growth Management Act, we're required to accommodate about 2,000 units in the next 20 years. What they've done is they've divided those 2,000 units into different income bands. And the city is required to plan for those different income bands. So Ryan will be going into that towards the end of September, what that really means for us.
Just when you think you know what you're doing, then they add more. All right. Thank you, Ryan.
Welcome. Thank you.
Oh, moving on to city administrator report.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one thing for me tonight. About a month ago, we were here discussing some downtown properties to look for the city to purchase to add parking. We have been in contact with both the properties that the council advised that they were possibly interested in, and neither one have willing sellers. One has a willing seller, the other one we are not recommending moving forward with due to the environmental report. So I'm happy to discuss that with you if you have any questions. The other thing is next week is Labor Day. We do not have a regular council meeting and we will not be holding one on Tuesday either. So enjoy the week off.
Thank you. Okay, any council have meeting agenda changes or anybody online have any changes that you need to make? None. Committees, everybody okay with their committees? All right, We have no executive session tonight. I will announce adjournment at 6:58.
Pat Cole has her hand up.
Oh, I erased that and we'll call on Pat Cole.
Okay, great, thank you. I just thought maybe I should mention that the Finance Committee will not be meeting. And we were scheduled to meet on the 6th.
Thank you, Councilmember Cole.
Mhm.
So now I'll adjourn. And at 6:50.